There's a great deal of speculation today about Russian foreign policies in the light of the Russian attack on the Ukraine and tensions between Russia and the NATO powers. One way we might try to understand the so-called new Cold War is by examining the first Cold War. The first Cold War began around 1945 between the Soviet Union and the United States, and it took the form of a contest for global influence and power. In 1946, just as the Soviet Union was imposing the so-called Iron Curtain across Europe, an American diplomat in Moscow called George F. Kennan was asked to explain to his government what was going on. In February that year, in a now famous analysis known as the Long Telegram, he argued that Soviet foreign policy drew on a combination of communist ideology and traditional Russian nationalism. Kennan argued that these influences explained why the Soviet Union had turned Eastern Europe, countries such as Poland, into so-called satellite states under Moscow's control. Kennan also suggested that Soviet leaders disrespected what he described as objective truth and saw, to quote Kennan, all stated facts as instruments for the furtherance of one ulterior purpose or another, unquote. He maintained too that the Soviet Union was determined to break free of what it saw as capitalist encirclement. The First Cold War ended in the 1980s and Russia is no longer a communist state, but in some ways Kennan's analysis is a timeless one. For a start, territorial expansion in places such as the Crimea and the Ukraine suggests that Russia might well be trying to create or recreate the Russian and Soviet past. Second, given Moscow's justifications for the attack on the Ukraine, Putin and his colleagues seem to be living in a world where facts appear to have little importance. The Kremlin has suggested, for example, that the Ukraine is itself responsible for genocide against Russian nationals. Third, just as the Kremlin saw Western policies of containment as a form of encirclement, it now has a similar view of NATO, which expanded in the late 1990s and early 2000s to include a number of former Iron Curtain states. In fact, around that time, a retired Kennan opposed NATO's eastward expansion on the grounds that it would inflame Russian nationalism and militarism. The impact of NATO expansion on Russian policies today is open to debate, but Kennan's view should be taken seriously. So it's very clear that studying the history of the First Cold War can at least help us to think about the new Cold War in a more informed way.